There are a lot of folk that no matter what color they vote, they have lost hope in the future of our country. I see it every day in the faces of my constituents.
Same in my congregation. They're wondering where they fit in or even if they should.
40 million Christians don't vote. And another 15 million aren't even registered.
Well, politics is a dirty business.
Yeah, so it's taking out the garbage. But if you turn your back to it, things start to stink.
That was a clip from the film God's Not Dead, In God We Trust. Yes, this is from a film, but the statistics and the concerns are true. Millions of Christians are planning not to vote this year, according to survey data from pollster George Barna from Arizona Christian University's Research Center. It is not noted what the cause behind this is, no clear indication of a lack of enthusiasm, but conservative radio host and founder of Turning Point, Charlie Kirk, raised great concern on this study, calling it a 5-alarm fire for President Trump. In 2020, 8 out of 10 evangelical Christians cast their vote for President Trump. Now, according to Barna's data, 41 million born-again Christians and 32 million Christians plan not to cast a ballot for either candidate. America is 68% Christian, last we checked. Not only is this wildly irresponsible if true, but it would be devastating to Christians who value a United States in which they could practice their own faith. This is a free country. You can vote if you want. It is not mandatory. We don't even get the day off for Election Day. But if you care about the future of this country, your family, your values, you plan to vote. The president does not have to be perfect. We are not electing a pope. But you have to make a bilateral choice, and you have to make a plan to vote. If you don't, and you see your gas prices going up, your children going off to war, and basic traditions being scrapped, you have no right to complain. Joining us now, Jim Pfaff of the Grassroots Conservative Caucus. Jim, you think this is true? You think these numbers are accurate?
They're probably pretty close to accurate. You know, I've been tracking these numbers for years. George Barna, has been tracking this for a long time. There's always been basically a problem with Christians getting out to vote, but it's happening in a much worse fashion now in the Trump era, because you have got on one side people in church, in the church that are scared to death of getting involved in politics. That's kind of always been the case. But you have had a recent influx of money from progressive atheists, frankly, to help support efforts to really shame Christians from even going out to vote. This was chronicled recently in Megan Basham's book, Shepherds for Sale. You've literally got George Soros and Pierre Odomar, one of the founders of PayPal, that are putting in millions of dollars into what those of us in the Christian community call Big Eva, to try to shame Christians from either voting at all if they support Trump or voting for Democrats, literally, like Kamala Harris. And it entirely goes against the values in the Christian community. As an evangelical who's worked on Capitol Hill, who's worked in politics for 30 years, I'm telling you, just the opposite should be true.
Why do so many Christians seem to choose inaction?
Because of fear, because of shame, because someone makes them feel bad about it. The seeds of this go as far back as Lyndon Johnson, when he was the majority leader in the Senate, and you first had an amendment that he put on into the 501c3 rules that churches cannot get involved in politics. That began because he had affairs that were coming out in one of his campaigns, and the churches were coming out against him, and he shut them down. There's a history in this church from our founding for pastors to do election day sermons, to do pre-election sermons, and really talk about these things. And consistently for decades now, particularly in the progressive era, beginning in the early 20th century, which we're on the back end of really trying to shut out the church from doing things. People just don't want Christians involved, and they work against them with the power they have of the purse and of politics.
Based on your experience on the ground, and you've been at this for years, you've been, involved in grassroots politics. I remember vividly the fear that swirled around the 2016 election when Trump was first vying for that office. And there were so many evangelical Christians who, on principle, they said, I just can't vote for that man. They were all Ted Cruz people. And, even the argument that, look, 3 Supreme Court seats could be at stake if you stay home, even that didn't seem to get through. And sometimes at times it felt like it was more of an ideological thing than it was even a fear. But that was back in 2016. What are you seeing this time around?
Well, I'll point again to Megan Basham's book, Shepherds for Sale. You see a persistent effort funded by atheist non-Christians, frankly, to encourage Christians to change their views of what their involvement in culture ought to be. They should be greatly involved in culture, but there's a move to advance a climate change agenda, even to tamp down any pushback against the homosexual or transgender agenda, which has very real moral, biblical implications. They're trying to twist theology in the churches. They're trying to shame pastors from taking a hard stand on any cultural issues, and they want to make Christians feel bad for doing so on their own, independently of maybe what their pastor says, which, by the way, they're commanded to do in the Bible. This is a very serious time in our country because we need Christians to stand up and push back against what's going on. Just on economics alone, if they don't want to get involved in the culture issues, which they should, just economics alone, this country is getting way out of line, and we need to push back against the government.
Well, Charlie Kirk has proposed, he's pushed that churches do need to get out the vote. They need to get involved. They need to tell their congregations to be involved in the election. Yet many churches, as you mentioned earlier, are terribly afraid to even touch anything remotely political. What's your take on this approach from Kirk, pushing for churches to change their tone, get a little more of a backbone?
Oh, I'm all for it. I've been doing this for decades now. When I worked for Focus on the Family from about 2005 on, Dr. Dobson tasked me with running the marriage amendment. I worked in the public policy section, the 501c4 organization. He tasked me with running the marriage amendment, which I headed up in Colorado. We went and registered churches to vote. We had massive pastor rallies where we would just have pastors come in. We would have David Barton and some congressmen and other speakers come in to talk about the importance of involving people in their congregations, to do voter registration drives, to get involved locally in what's happening in politics, to assert a Christian worldview. Our entire system of justice, our entire system of government even, is founded in the Judeo-Christian ethic. We're not necessarily a stated Christian nation in terms of the government creating a Christian church, but every part of what our Constitution was built upon, statements in our Declaration of Independence, and the whole inspiration behind what we became as a country was strongly influenced by the Judeo-Christian ethic. The founding fathers are by far, I think up to 70%, quoted scripture more than even people like John Locke or Montesquieu, who influenced their political opinions. So Christians have a right and a need to do that, and pastors absolutely. There should be voter registration drives and encouraging people to get out to vote in an urgent fashion as Christian duty.
Jim, you put together ads, separate from the Trump campaign, but you and your group, Conservative Caucus, you put together ads that are targeted to voters. If you were to target Christian voters who are on the fence right now, what is the message that you would put out there to motivate them to show up?
Well, and by the way, we're the second largest independent expenditure effort. We don't coordinate with the Trump campaign in any way. This is all that we do. And I would be and am telling Christians all the time, you have a right and a necessity to influence what's happening in culture. You know, it's often been said that you can't legislate morality. And if you mean by that legislation's not going to make people moral, I would agree with that. But if you're trying to say that there should be no morality in legislation, all legislation is based in some morality.
Well, as far as corruption goes, nothing's new under the sun, right? But it doesn't mean that you can't keep fighting for it, against it. Jim Pfaff,
That's right.
Always a pleasure. Thank you so much. Coming up, our viewers peer into their crystal ball and share what the future holds. It's time next for Mark My Words.